I talked to Joe, is Reverend Joe here? Holy mackerel. So we might have to do, yeah, 3 minutes or less. All right. Well, there's still a lot. I mean, if we gave everybody 3 minutes, that's like 30. Well,
3 minutes, 20 is a full hour.
can I get you to call? Yeah, can you have somebody
3
call?
minutes is probably the
Will somebody call the names or?
Yeah, we can do that.
Oh, sorry. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Common Council Public Safety Meeting. Today is January 28th. We're starting a few minutes late. So what we're going to do tonight, because we do have a packed house, and it's always exciting when we do have the feedback, so I appreciate it. There was 2 items that we want to talk about tonight. One is to do an appointment to the Community Police Review Board, and that'll be, we're going to be talking to Emily Sowick, and then we're going to talk about the ordinance 227224, talking about aggressive solicitation. So, and I know that'll be the main topic that most of the people here would like to hear, and we do have a tremendous amount of people signed up. So what we'll probably have to do is limit it to 3 minutes. And if you're willing to give up some of your 3 minutes to the next person, we can work with you on that also. So I just want to introduce the committee. I have Jack Flynn. We have Kelly Kimbrough and Sonia Frederick and Council Member Megan Keegan. I'm Tom Hoey. I'm the chair of the Public Safety Committee. We have our city clerk, Shaniqua Jackson, here tonight. Corporation Counsel, Robert McGee. Research Counsel, Jake Iceland. Legislative Director, Brian Jimenez. And Junior Policy Analyst, Alyssa Camara. And also, so we're going to start with interviewing Emily Sowick for the CPRB position. Come on up and we'll ask you some questions.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, Emily. So, you know, how the procedure works is the committee will make a recommendation or not for the full council to appoint you to the CPRB. As you know, the council gets to appoint 5 members for the CPRB, and the mayor gets 4. These are, I think it's a 2-year term, am I right? Or is it a 3-year, Jake? Do you remember? And is this to fulfill a term? Okay, so it's going to fulfill for Milton Arroyo, who had to resign. And we'll get you that details before you go before the full council. So what we'd like you to do is just talk about your background, why you'd like to be on the CPRB. It's a tough committee, board. And go ahead.
Sure. I'm sorry, this is a little loud. As I met with you previously in the summer, my experience, I've been a long time, all my life, resident of the city of Albany. I grew up here, went to public school here. I am currently the principal at St. Anne Institute, so I work with lots of young women. Oh, I didn't break that, I promise, Channel 10. And I think that seeing the intersection of juvenile justice, the city's needs, I think I would be a decent fit because I do believe that I have an understanding of what law enforcement is working with, along with what the needs of particularly our youth are.
Okay, is there any questions from the committee members? Go ahead,
I
Jim.
just want to know, what one quality would you bring to the CPRB?
I think I'm very fair and impartial. I think I have an ability to look at things from multiple vantage points without a tremendous amount of emotion or attachment, and I think that that could be of benefit to the review board.
Thank you.
Sonia?
Thank you for being here, and thank you for expressing interest in this position again. My question for you is, have you been following the CPRB? Have you been watching their meetings, learning of what they do in advance of this potential opportunity?
A little bit. What led me to apply for this last spring was that I saw a news segment about the training courses that people go through, the community liaison stuff that they do, and it was very, very interesting. And that led me to the City Hall website. I looked through and saw that there was a lot of training that came with this, which I appreciate. But that's how I got here.
And would someone be able to dive into the meeting schedule and how often the CPRB meets, just to give a little bit more color to Emily, to make sure that that will work
sure.
with your
Sure.
commitments that you have?
Do we have anybody from the CPRB tonight? I thought they were going to try to make it.
I believe it's monthly meetings, right?
It's monthly meetings, and then there's also committee meetings. They'll assign you to committee like investigative and bylaws and stuff like that. So there would be some time required for that. But
And the monthly meetings, are they typically Thursday evenings? Yeah, so Thursday evenings, are those decent days for you?
They are. I remember some of this, as I mentioned previously, I was here this summer.
Good, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And just to let you know, one of the changes was before the CPRB would meet over at the Albany Law School. Since January 1st, the CPRB is now a quasi-city department. And so the meetings will be held here in the Common Council chambers. And we do have headquarters up on, I think it's,
175 Central.
okay.
Where's that about?
Across from
175.
Firestone, it's
Okay, sure. Yep,
the old workforce.
sure. Mhm.
Okay, is there any other questions from committee members? What about questions from non-committee members? None? Okay, and the only thing I mentioned to you before the meeting, we are going to do a full background check. You know, we want to make sure that there's no skeletons in the closet per se.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we learn from our mistakes, the council, and moving forward, we'll make sure that everybody is fully investigated.
100%.
Okay, so, you know, go ahead, Jack.
I'd like to make a favorable nomination for Emily to go to the full Common Council.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it's unanimous. Thank you, Emily.
Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.
Okay, so how we'll do this is, let's have Council Member Keegan talk about ordinance 227224. If you could go over the changes that you want to make, and for my sake, would you mind giving an example of how this would work, you know, as far as, you know, if this law went into effect and somebody is, you know, aggressive solicitation, what exactly would happen and the steps? But we'll let you go ahead.
Are
Thank
we
you.
going to allow for public comment? Because I know people signed up.
Oh, absolutely. We have a lot. But I think for the people to understand the legislation, that we
Sure.
go over it.
I'm happy to do that. I just didn't want, I
Sure.
wanted to make sure that folks had an opportunity to speak on the
And-
legislation. So we'll start with the fact that, you know, the city has had an aggressive solicitation legislation on the books since 2009. That currently is quantified as a violation under city code. And so it becomes very difficult to enforce. Police have to be a direct witness to the act. And the only response that can be granted at that point in time is the issuance of a ticket with no further intervention on the behavior that we're seeing. And I want to point out that this legislation has nothing to do with homelessness. It has nothing to do with panhandling or solicitation specifically, and everything to do with behavior and deciding what is and is not appropriate behavior in our community. So we changed the statute around and redefined what constitutes as aggressive panhandling and what constitutes as panhandling in a hostile manner. Those acts which remain under panhandling in an aggressive manner would remain a violation, and those include intentionally blocking or interfering with the safe or free passage of a pedestrian or vehicle by any means, including unreasonably causing a pedestrian or vehicle to take evasive action to avoid physical contact, or soliciting, asking, or begging while in a roadbed, except for within the crosswalk while crossing that roadbed is legally permitted. And then the second part is using violent or threatening gestures towards a person solicited. We've received some concerns about Part C and the language being vague. Jack and I have discussed that, and we both agreed to strike that language from the bill if approved by the committee. So the rest of the language in the bill, all the way up through hostile manner, is already language that is on the books. That original legislation dealt with prohibiting panhandling from within a certain distance of banks and ATMs. So then you get into the statutory section that defines what constitutes panhandling in a hostile manner. And that includes approaching or speaking to a person or following a person before, during, or after, soliciting, asking, or begging if that conduct is intended or is likely to cause a reasonable person to fear bodily harm to oneself or to another, or damage to or loss of property by means of threatening violence or speech intended to vilify, humiliate, or incite violence against a group or class of persons on the basis of race, color, religion, ethnicity, national origin, disability, sex, sexual orientation, gender, or gender expression. So essentially targeting somebody who declines to give one funds based upon their status as a member of a protected class under state human rights law. Jack and I discussed the concerns over the last part of that section, which refers to the penal code, and we have agreed that that language is holdover language from the previous bill. It does not make sense to continue to have that language, and we would request that the committee allow us to strike the language or the commission of any offense as defined in Section 10 of the penal code, which is essentially the part of state law that defines what constitutes a crime, because we are now referring to other parts of the penal code elsewhere in this legislation. I don't think that that language is necessary. Or otherwise be intimidated into giving money or another thing of value. The second part of this hostile manner talks about having physical contact with a person or vehicle, either by touch, fluid, projectile, or other contact without that person or owner's consent in the course of soliciting, asking, or begging, and acting in an aggressive manner, which would, again, refer back to that section of the legislation that defines what is aggressive panhandling for more than 2 minutes. Or acting in such manners as described under Section 240.25 and 240.26 of the penal law. Those are the sections of the penal law that define criminal harassment and disorderly conduct when soliciting, asking, or begging. The statute also goes on and has language that already defines what constitutes, and this is language that was already on the books, a public place or to solicit, ask, or beg. We added a definition for retail establishment, and we changed some of the language in the prohibited acts section. So and that includes the addition to the legislation of Section E under prohibited acts, prohibiting the approach, a person shall not approach an operator or other occupant of a motor vehicle while such vehicle is located on any street to solicit, ask, or beg for the purposes of either performing or offering to perform a service in connection with such vehicle or otherwise. Soliciting the sale of goods or services as such approaching, performing, offering, or soliciting is done in an aggressive manner as defined in this article. It does not apply to services rendered in connection with the lawful towing of a vehicle, in connection with emergency repairs, or other such services requested by the operator or occupant of the vehicle. It talks about solicitation within a certain distance of a building, and it talks about solicitation with regards to retail establishments for which folks have permission to be there to solicit. The other kind of piece, the other major piece to this is that those acts that are defined in a hostile manner will be raised to have a misdemeanor charge. That allows for several things to occur. Police do not have to directly witness the conduct if it is a misdemeanor. They can issue or respond or take police reports based upon a sworn statement from a witness. We did, however, confine the penalty to what originally existed in statute. And we did that intentionally to ensure that this legislation was focused not on incarcerating people, but on ensuring that they were brought before the courts for an opportunity to have court-mandated services. So the bill also goes into alternative justice pathways. It also requires that anybody who comes into contact with law enforcement in relation to the legislation be referred to services and treatment upon that contact. So, you know, Jack and I worked very diligently to ensure that this was a bill that was focused on behavior, that drew a line in the types of behaviors that we're willing to tolerate on our city streets, while also recognizing that many of the folks who may be engaging in this behavior have underlying behavioral health issues that may be untreated. In order to push the courts, if folks are coming before the court as a result of a misdemeanor charge, towards the pathway of probation and court-ordered supervised treatment. That is really the intended goal, is for this to be an additional tool. We have Navigates, we have LEAD, and it is our hope that folks avail themselves of all of the services that we've put into place over the last several years. But we do have a cohort of folks who, and it's about 50%, I believe, is the most recent data that we've gotten from Albany Navigates, are declining services. And at that point, what do we do? I think there has to be a balance in the city between the civil rights of business owners, the civil rights of people who are trying to get and navigate about the city to their jobs, to run errands, to their kids at the park, to our kids who are trying to get to school, and the civil rights of the folks who are soliciting on our city streets.
Okay, Megan, I kind of, when you started, I was able to keep up, but I lost my place.
That's okay.
So, but what I'd like to do, can we talk about what you want to strike? And we can do that now,
Sure.
so we don't have to deal
So
with it later.
the
So section, in
the ch-
hostile manners, section C, we
So
want to,
under aggressive manner, we want to strike section C, which is the language that says cause a reasonable person to suffer unreasonable inconvenience, annoyance, or alarm by continuing to solicit after having been asked to stop. I think that
yeah,
in many
I can't
ways that's
find it,
already
though.
covered elsewhere.
Oh, okay, it was changed.
Got it.
So aggressive manner, C, cause a person, okay. So we want-
There were concerns raised from members of the public. They felt that that language was vague, although it is, you know, essentially language that was pulled straight from the penal code, and is certainly well-defined within case law. I think I would agree that we're
Sure.
covering that elsewhere in the legislation. It doesn't, that language doesn't need to be there.
So, can I get a motion that we strike this section off the legislation? Is that, Jake, is that the proper way to do it?
I think that it doesn't need to happen. I think that the proper thing to do would be, once you've agreed on all changes, you can vote to approve a version, that version with positive recommendation.
Is it possible to do one at a time legally?
So the issue is that, right, you provide a recommendation of the bill, so, you know,
As
you're
we're
not
working
recommending
on
like
it-
just this particular portion.
I would feel more comfortable doing it as we're working on it, because then if we have to come back, we can go back to a new copy with all that gone, right? Or do we need to leave that in there struck out?
So the legislation has been introduced, so it's you know, it's a bill that's sitting in the body. Nothing will be amended until the next meeting.
Council
and then-
meeting.
Yes, and then the council can motion to that. What's happening in committee is that the committee can vote to give the bill a positive recommendation, but you will be doing that pending a certain list of changes. So
The committee can also recommend, changes, though.
you can motion to recommend anything you'd like.
Okay. So I won't call for a motion, but, so we are going to strike out on aggressive manner, section C. So.
Yep, that's the first one. And then the second one is under hostile manner, section A, clause 1. The last section that says, or the commission of any offense is defined in section 10 of the penal law upon oneself or another. That or the commission of any offense is defined in section 10 of the penal law. Again, I don't think is necessary because we already refer back to the penal law in the statute, and that section 10 is very broad. It basically provides definitions to what constitutes, a Class A felony versus a Class B felony. I mean, that is what that section of the penal code is. It's holdover language from the previous ordinance that was written in 2009 that I don't know if section 10 has been altered since then, but,
Sure.
In going back and looking at it, it just doesn't seem to be necessary. And those were the two
Okay.
components
So
that
it
I
starts
wanted.
with, or the commission of any offense as defined in section 10 of the penal code. Is it that sentence is going to come out?
Yeah. Just that reference to
Okay.
the penal law in that section. It just,
All right. And they were the only changes that we wanted, that you wanted.
unless you guys had other components of the statute that you felt were concerning or inappropriate that you wanted to bring up for discussion,
Sure.
I'm happy to, and I'm sure Jack is happy to entertain those discussions. But,
Okay.
based upon the discussions I've had over the last several months with members of the community, those are the two kind of big language things that stuck out to people who were overall supportive of the bill, but really had concerns about those clauses.
Okay, thank you. Robert, do you have a chance to review this? Is there anything that jumps out at you that might be unenforceable, or, because your office will have to deal with it? Do you mind just giving input on that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Mr. Williams' comments have been circulated, but there are constitutional problems whenever you're trying to regulate panhandling. I'm sure the council knows that panhandling is protected free speech, and there have been similar laws that have been struck down based on the current understanding of what the First Amendment requires. And what that requirement is essentially an extremely compelling governmental interest in the regulation of speech. And I'm not an expert on First Amendment law, but I haven't been able to find an instance in which a municipal ordinance directed specifically like panhandling has been able to pass constitutional muster. But I can discuss this further as, drafting.
Okay,
Moved
so,
on.
but do you see anything right away that we crossed out two little parts, we'll just keep going and then we'll come back, I guess?
Sure, yeah, I mean, with respect to specific language, I think the references to the penal law harassment provisions is particularly a problem. I mean, in the one case that I can circulate, the holding was essentially that if an activity is already if there's already a criminal prohibition against a certain type of activity, including, a heightened punishment based on, an expression that's protected under the First Amendment is problematic. So that might be something you want to review on the second draft.
Okay. Jake, do you have any concerns?
So I don't mean to get into the legality of our current panhandling statute, but I would certainly think that whatever applies to this would apply to the current one, because it really uses a mirroring structure, right? We currently have a prohibition on aggressive panhandling. The other thing I would say is that I think the legal question here is whether this is a proper time, place, and manner restriction. I think the intent is for it to be, the prohibition to be to do this in this hostile manner. You can't, we have provided there is still appropriate manners for this sort of speech. It's just not in ways that are already criminal in other ways.
Okay. All right. Does the committee members have anything to bring up before I start? We'll start having people come up and give public comment. Is everybody good? All right. So who's going? Is it Shanika? Are you going to call the names? Yes. And we'll give you 3 minutes. And again, if it's hard not to repeat things, but if 10 people are saying the same thing, but it's important that you get it out there. All right. So go ahead, Shanika.
The first speaker is Alana Klein.
Good evening. I'll try to keep this brief because there's obviously a lot of people here. My main concerns with this are...
Can you state your name and address?
I'm sorry. Alana Klein, 214 J Street. My main concern is the punishment of probation, community service, fine, or jail. I assume that's up to a judge, but I would recommend setting maximum punishments, like first offense is a week of community service, then 2 weeks, and then jail. I just don't want to see people who are quote-unquote first-time offenders be sent to jail. So that's one thing I would like you to consider. Also, the police department making sure that people have access to resources and stuff like that. I would just like to make sure that you're considering addiction and maybe connecting them to a social worker at DSS or something. So that's all I got. Work out the IRA, Black Lives Matter. Assalamu alaikum.
Our next public commenter, is it Talali Vasquez?
Hi, council members. My name is Citlali Vasquez. I live in Ward 6, and I'm here to speak against the anti-panhandling ordinance. Just a little bit of background about myself. I work as a case manager for a family shelter here in Manans, so I know a good bit about working with the unhoused community. Since starting this job, I've almost been here a year. I have learned just how little support and care we provide for this community, and it is really disheartening to see. And this ordinance is a perfect example of just how little we care for them. In my experience, I can see that it is increasingly difficult for an unhoused person to find housing. There are many hurdles that the residents have to get over in order to find an apartment. Many apartments require things like a credit score above 650, a clean tenant record, and an income that's 3 times the rent. Most of the residents that I work with, actually probably all of them, don't meet any of this criteria. So a big part of my job is to make sure that the residents are looking for housing, because they still have to do that. And I also provide them with housing applications. So I often provide them with many applications for housing authorities and other income-based / affordable housing, since that's the only thing that most residents qualify for. However, even these apartments are hard for the residents to get into, especially if they have a criminal record. Because if everything already didn't make it hard, now a criminal record will deny you from the only housing you may qualify for. I had a specific case where a resident knew that these types of housing were the only housing they would qualify for, so that's all that they were applying for. After applying to many housing authorities and income-based housing, they received a denial letter from one of them stating that they were denied due to their criminal record. This immediately made them lose all hope of finding any apartment, because they knew that all the other housing authorities and affordable housing that they applied for were also going to be denied for the same exact reason. The crime that this person had committed was the crime, by the way, it was panhandling. This person was arrested for panhandling. It was put on their criminal record, and this literally 5 years later came back to bite them in the butt, and they lost all hope that they had for any housing. So when you say that this ordinance does not punish homeless people, it definitely does. It affects all of us. It's not this panhandling thing. Most of us who live in houses are not out asking for money. We're not out panhandling. So this pretty much only is targeting unhoused people. So I definitely don't think this should be something that should be passed. We should be focusing on getting these people housed, or if you're trying to get them mental health help, then do something that can actually get them that help that they need. This is literally just going to punish them. Thank you.
Celeste Widener.
Can you hang on 1 second? Robert, when I'm trying to remember the law, and you might know better than me. If I always heard that an employer, and I don't know about if you're renting an apartment, can ask you if you've been arrested, number one, but they can't ask you if you were convicted of a misdemeanor, but they could ask you if you committed a felony, if you've been convicted of a felony. Am I mistaken in that?
I'm honestly not familiar with the laws at this point. I know they have changed and there are some restrictions, but yeah, I can't speak that specifically. I can look into it though and follow
Yeah, would you
up later.
mind, because I just want to make sure, it sticks in my mind from job interviews that, you know, if you were arrested, people can't ask you, were you ever arrested? But they can ask you if you've been convicted of a felony. I don't even think they can, because a traffic ticket is a misdemeanor. I mean, if you think about it. All right, thank you. You go ahead, Shaniqua.
Celeste Widener.
Hello, and you get bonus points for pronouncing my name right. So hi, I'm Celeste Widener. I'm a resident in Center Square, and I'm worried about how this will be enforced against people who already have little power in the criminal justice system. Because who's going to prove how many minutes someone was standing at how many feet away? The Common Council's resources, I think, are better spent on housing and policies which give our neighbors who are struggling a chance to get help rather than get them out of sight. The panhandling ordinance forces people into fines they can't pay in correctional settings, which just cause more human misery. Thanks for listening.
Persephone Naylor.
Is this going to start on its own? Okay. Hi, I'm Persephone Naylor. I live at 486 Washington Ave in Albany. I am a longtime outreach worker in this city and have worked elsewhere too. I have a lot of points, so I'll try to go quickly, and they're going to be all over the place. But I would just like to remind everyone that this is actually not a new strategy. I worked with homeless folks constantly that were on probation. All it meant was that they were sleeping in an abandoned building, and they had to go to Dunkin' Donuts to charge their ankle monitor to not get violated. So, I mean, I didn't really see it benefiting anybody when they were subject to community supervision. I didn't see it help them connect to resources or anything like that. I would also like to say that as far as officers kind of referring folks to community resources, as another case manager pointed out, they really aren't there. I work within the system, so I know very well what we're lacking. I see people wait for housing 2-3 years. I now work in veteran outreach where we get folks in a month because they have more resources. So that's a testament to what we could do if we had appropriate funding to help folks. And I also just wanted to say, like, I mean, some of these folks that I work with have the type of stories like you couldn't even possibly fathom. I get that folks engage in criminal behavior, which is already illegal, so I don't really necessarily understand the point of an ordinance, but I get that there's annoyances, I get there's inconveniences, but to be having a conversation centered around poverty and we're talking about all the other people it impacts, not the poor people, is interesting. So I would just say shout out to my folks that, you know, that are on the streets, and I wish that we could do more to help them, and I hope that we do. I hope that we direct resources to housing, because we know that works. I think you can point to Albany and say, like, we have housing first, it's not really working, and it's not working well because, again, we just don't have the resources. Like, we have all these housing programs, but doesn't mean landlords are willing to work with us, doesn't mean there's housing available, doesn't magically make all the barriers to housing go away. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Heather Kirk Davidoff.
Hi, I'm Pastor Heather Kirk Davidoff. I'm the minister of the Westminster Presbyterian Church in Albany on 262 State Street, and I also live at 35 Dove Street. And I just have a couple quick points to make. As many of you probably know, Westminster Presbyterian is part of the Focus Churches of Albany. We provide a number of services to folks who are in need of emergency food help in the city of Albany, including a number of people who are unhoused and a number of people who I see later in the day panhandling in my neighborhood and on Lark Street and all around the city. Because of, we house the Focus Breakfast at Westminster, I'm very familiar with the community that would be, probably be the people who would be subject to some of the law that you're considering tonight. So two quick things. One is, over the past couple months, both in December and January, Westminster has been the location for a couple of community meetings around issues related to homelessness in the city of Albany. One was in December. It was organized by Serve Albany, and there was over 100 people, service providers, community members, and just people in the interested public, as well as faith community leaders. And it was a 2.5-hour forum about homelessness in Albany, and people brainstormed about all sorts of ways to address the issues related to homelessness in our city, and not a single person talked about needing to arrest people or send them to court. It didn't come up. And then again in January, we were hosted a meeting for stakeholders in the Center Square neighborhood to talk about quality of life questions and public safety. We had the Commissioner of Police there, as well as our neighborhood officer, several other officers. We had the chairs of all the neighborhood associations around, and several faith leaders and so on. And again, it was a really great, productive night of brainstorming about how everybody could come together to address issues related to homelessness, including quality of life issues in Center Square, including panhandling. And in that whole 2+ hour conversation, not a single person suggested arresting people for panhandling, whatever form or shape it took. In the context of both of those meetings, there was a lot of creative solutions suggested, and nobody suggested that what was needed was the power to arrest people, to take them to court, and to sentence them to anything. The second point I want to make is that, in my experience, I'll say it really quick, many people find any form of panhandling to be intimidating and to be aggressive. People can ask with the nicest, most complete, best manners they possibly have, and some people will feel intimidated by that. So it's not, I don't think it's possible to regulate people's manners through law. Thanks for listening.
Dylan Boyer.
Hi, my name's Dylan. I live in Dove Street. I lived on Dove Street since about 2017. When I moved to Dove Street, Lark Street was a vibrant and bustling street. That is no longer the case, and one of the reasons definitely is the aggressive panhandling. I avoid Lark Street at all costs at this point. I will not walk down it because I cannot walk down it without being harassed. And we're not talking about people there holding signs and just simply asking for money. They are aggressive. If you say no, there are people that demand to see your wallet to prove that it's empty. There are people that will follow you down the street. I don't know that this is the solution, but it's definitely a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Danny Boudreau.
Danny Boudreau, 494 Madison Avenue. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for letting me speak tonight. I know this ordinance has stirred up a lot of emotions, so I want to take a moment to address what's really at stake here. First off, this isn't about criminalizing homelessness or poverty. It's about addressing real ongoing problems that so many residents have been dealing with for months. Quite often, we're talking about the same handful of people, not generally homeless people, but like 4 to 5 people that repeat the behaviors over several months that are engaging in aggressive and hostile behaviors, and it's been affecting our neighborhood in a big way. These aren't isolated incidents. I've personally been asked for money multiple times in the same encounter, and when I didn't give it, I was fouled and called homophobic slurs. Similar things have happened to me multiple times on and around Lark Street. I have been on a listening tour for months in the 6th Ward, and women and elderly neighbors tell me they're afraid to walk alone, and even my own family doesn't like visiting me on Lark Street anymore because of these situations. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's about feeling safe in the places we live and work. I want to address some of the specifics of this ordinance because I think there's been some misunderstandings out there. For example, I've seen a social media post that states that causing inconvenience or annoyance counts towards aggressive panhandling. Well, that post didn't include the adjective unreasonable, and it didn't include the second half of the sentence, which reads by continuing to solicit after having been asked to stop. I hope that all of us in this room would agree that no means no, and anything after that is crossing into aggressive territory. Social media posts also claim that people are prohibited from approaching cars, but left out the conjunction if such an approaching is done in a hostile manner. A hostile manner is not just asking someone for help. It's about intimidation, like following someone, blocking their path, or intentionally touching them without consent, which are outlined in subsections A1 through A3. These are clear, targeted behaviors that many in our communities have experienced too often. I want to also point out that only 2 of the subsections in this ordinance are being classified as misdemeanors. Sections 255, 59A, and D, which discuss soliciting in a hostile manner, not general soliciting. I think it's important to say this, that yes, it's really critical to have empathy for people who are struggling, but it's also important to have empathy for everyone who lives here and works here. And empathy isn't the same thing as sympathy. Sympathy is feeling bad for someone, feeling sorry for them because of their situation. Empathy is about understanding someone's experiences and seeing their perspective. I would ask that instead of villainizing people who really feel unsafe or whose quality of life have been compromised, we try to understand where they're coming from. Many of these people have compassion for the homeless and volunteer in the community and donate. They just want to also feel safe in their own neighborhoods, and that's not too much to ask. At the same time, I get that we need to think a lot bigger. This ordinance will not solve homelessness, and I know we can do a lot more on that front. That's why I think we should expand upon police crisis units by adding registered nurses, as was done with great success in New York City. And maybe it's time for Albany to look into creating a Department of Homeless Services to give us a better and more coordinated way to address the root causes of homelessness, like housing first, mental health, and addiction support. At the end of the day, my community is fed up with feeling unsafe. We're tired of women, seniors, and others feeling like they have to look over their shoulders and not walk down the streets alone. And we're tired of businesses losing customers because people don't feel comfortable coming downtown or to Lark Street. This ordinance is a step in the right direction, but it's obviously not the whole solution, and it's not going to fix homelessness. But it's something we can do right now to help people feel safe. Again, only talking about people who are being hostile. I hope we can pass this ordinance and then work together on bigger long-term solutions, because we all want Albany to be a safe and welcoming place for everyone. Thank you.
Bridget Spies. Bridget Spies.
Hello, my name is Bridget Spies, and I live in the 9th Ward. I would like to start by saying I'm not entirely sure what the council's goal is here. We already have laws surrounding disorderly conduct and assault, so I'm not entirely sure why, when that is done in conjunction with panhandling, we've decided to add additional criminal charges to that. I would like to say that if you wanted to connect your unhoused neighbors with the resources that they need, you could do that. And I'm not just saying that in your capacity as city council members, I'm saying that as in your capacity as members of this community. You could go outside, you could buy your neighbor a cup of coffee. I've done that several times to people walking down Lark Street who have approached me. I have had people call me names. I have had people follow me down the street. But I think it's very important to remember that you might feel unsafe in a situation like this, but homeless people feel unsafe every single day. And that is the life that they live in. And so if you feel annoyed or inconvenienced by their requests for help, remember that requesting help is very hard, and that it is something that many of us struggle to do every day, and it is something that many people have had to resort to because help is not available to them, as several people have addressed here today. I used to work as an EMT with members of the homeless community. I used to work in several different homeless encampments providing medical care, and there are so many barriers stacked against people to receive the help they need, and one of those is most certainly criminal charges. Any sort of criminal charge makes it more difficult to find work. It makes it more difficult to find housing, and while there may be laws surrounding whether or not employers or housing can ask about your previous criminal history, they do not always stop them. Every housing application I have ever had has asked about previous criminal history, regardless of whether or not that is allowed. So I really encourage you to put yourself in the shoes of people who feel unsafe and are struggling every single day, and to think about what their needs are, and I really cannot imagine that this is it. So, thank you.
Joe Paparone.
You know, Reverend Joe Paparone, I live up by the high school in Alfredo's district. I'm an organizer with the National Union of the Homeless, the New York State Poor People's Campaign, the Nonviolent Medicaid Army. And it's been a tough week, right? I've spoken here before, and I've talked about the war on the poor. And I just saw the news that these federal expenditure cuts have been paused, but we need to be really clear on exactly who that targets and who suffers the most when those kind of things happen, right? But that's not the only place that this happens. This war on the poor shows up in so many different ways, and this, while well-intentioned ordinance, is another instance of that. And I said this previously when I've spoken here, nobody in this room thinks that the status quo is okay, all right? We're on the same, there is a problem that we need to solve, and it is multifaceted and has many dimensions. And in fact, many of the advocates who are speaking out against this bill are spending way more than any paid time, volunteering, right? They're not paid to do all of the work trying to support our struggling neighbors. I want to put this invitation out because as part of the National Union of the Homeless, we've been organizing for 6 months. I invite all of you to come to that breakfast that Heather talked about, the Focus Church breakfast. Every Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 150 people are gathering for a hot breakfast for an hour and a half. You can come by 7 to 8:30. If you want to meet with our homeless union leaders, I can arrange that as well, but you gotta hear their stories directly, because the narrative about homelessness and poverty that we hear from politicians is incorrect and is not reflective of their experiences. So, Tom, I appreciate that you have tried to facilitate some of these conversations, and I was glad to join a few calls back in the fall around this. Interestingly, I just want to point out that when I brought up this bill to my wife, she said, you know, I get harassed like that at every bar and club I go to by sex pests. Why don't we have an ordinance against that? Well, when we say this isn't about homelessness, folks, like, because the people who are sex pests are college students, lobbyists, legislators, right? We're going after the wrong folks. This is the war on the poor we're talking about here. This narrative that people don't want help and that they're refusing services, we need to interrogate that, because the services on offer force people into impossible decisions where they have to throw away all their stuff if they want to stay in the warming center overnight, right? Or stay in the vastly overcrowded Mission, right? Which is unsafe for all sorts of reasons, despite the tremendous work that the people are trying to do there. It's been raised that being in the criminal system on parole or probation will help, it will make the county responsible to force people to get the services they need. That is news to everybody I've ever spoken to who is on probation or parole. They do not help folks get housing. It's just not the case. And the last thing, I'm sorry, I know I'm at my time here, but this one really, I'm going to try and stay calm. This makes me really angry. The idea that the police are restricted is just absurd. I personally, in 2018 with the Poor People's Campaign, obstructed traffic for 4 hours in front of the police, right outside the Capitol here, and they did not arrest us. Dante Ivey, who was walking in a place where no crime had been reported, was stopped unconstitutionally, harassed, chased, assaulted, and murdered outside his home. What happened to his family, by the way? They were made homeless afterwards because they depended on his income. This idea that the cops just can't do anything because it's not a misdemeanor is mind-boggling. It's just not real, and you have to know that. So please, let's work together and come up with real solutions that get to the root cause of this and stop just expanding the criminal system when we're getting it from all sides and we're hearing it nonstop. This is a right-wing reactionary bill. Please, please reconsider. Thank you.
Irene Gallagher. Irene Gallagher.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Irene Gallier. That's all right. Everybody says Gallagher. It looks like Gallagher. 315 Sheridan Avenue, Albany, New York. I do wish you'd come to breakfast. I wish you would come to breakfast tomorrow because we have a wonderful man. He's a judge. He's a former judge. Pardon me? Herrick? Yeah. Okay. He volunteers there. I know Stephen. Okay? It's a community meal. It's not just for the poor or the homeless or the people who suffer from insecurity due to food. It's for Albany. The only thing I'm going to disagree with my people is that you can be a felon. You can have 32 felonies against you, and you can get housing if you're Donald Trump. You can also get pardoned if you killed somebody on January 6, 2021, if you got a politician in your pocket. I wish we were here moving housing first forward, like they did in Finland in the 1990s, when they had 20,000 homeless on the street. When they instituted housing first, they decreased those numbers in 2022 to, I have to look, I think it's 4,000. They decreased it by 16,000 people off the street. Housing first, it's on invisible people, it's on the internet. I spoke about this about a month ago at the solstice. I lived at South Mall Towers. You all know the atrocity at Lincoln Towers. We want adequate housing. We fought for this country. We pay taxes to this country. We will not be treated like that. I've been denied services. I couldn't get an ambulance. I had cops that wouldn't take a friggin' police report. I was assaulted by a police officer when he juggled my chains. What's funny, young lady? Nothing. You better not be. Because when it does happen to you or a family member, you'll know what I'm talking about. You have violence in your schools. You have violence in your churches. You have violence in your malls. You have Hollywood Cafe being blown up with guns. Not one of them are homeless. You have a woman in Saratoga Springs that refused a homeless shelter because we're pedophiles, sex traffickers, drug addicts that want to shoot your schools up. Correct? Times Union, August 13th, last year. Get real or get out. I relinquish my 5 seconds. Oh, 7? Well, am I over? I'm sorry. I was wondering what was going up. Oh, are we going to be on the news?
Emily Sowick. Emily Sowick. Emily, do you want to speak still? Okay. John Cutrow. John Cutrow. That's you? Okay. Give me one moment, sir. Do we have the handheld mic? Handheld mic? I call it John Cutrow. Cutrow. Okay.
My name is John Cutrow. I live at 727 Madison Avenue, Albany, New York. And I've been a lot of different things throughout my life. I've been a homicide investigator. Most importantly of all, I've been a restorative practitioner with Dennis Mosley and other people in this city. We, 25 years ago, ran a forensic case management program that had a jobs component, pathways to employment. And we put people to work through the business improvement districts, through Homeless and Travelers Aid. we think that solution made a big difference, most importantly with the core group of individuals who are the ones that you are concerned about. My focus right here and now is I want to make a challenge that we move from the problems of community to the possibilities of community. It's a different part of your brain working. And what our proposal to the county involves is, number one, we don't start with a performance-based contract that says that we're going to produce this measurable difference from the baseline. We want to start before that. We want to start with conversations, convening conversations within this community as many times as necessary for the community to say these are the outcomes we want achieved with a Pathways to Employment program. Because then it is more democratic. It involves working with the people who are the challenges. That is one of the things Dennis and I focused on exclusively, is doing restorative circles with some of the most challenging sex offenders, other people, individuals in the community that were in real conflict with the community. You work with those that make the challenges, and you focus on those. You make a difference, because it isn't all of the people who are doing the panhandling on the street. So let's move from problem-based thinking to possibilities-based. That's the first part of our proposal, and then we get to performance outcomes that the community is in agreement on. And then we implement, like we did 25 years ago, with Judge Herrick's help. I'm trapped.
Richard Johnson, he's going to bring the microphone to you. You can stay seated.
Good evening. My name is Richard Johnson. I became homeless April of last year. Not because I wanted to become homeless, but because a guy in the parking garage broke my leg. And I had to go to the hospital, had to have my leg rebuilt. I was living at Maiden Lane. The maintenance guy and the case manager decided they wanted to jump me in the basement after having surgery on my leg. I went back to get my belongings from the Waldorf Hotel, hotel, the old hotel or whatever. I went to get my belongings, but the roaches and the mice were so bad in the building, I couldn't even take any of my belongings with me. So, what do you call it? So, I went to DSS for help, and you know what they told me? To seek family and friends. I slept in the street for 4 days after having surgery, and the doctor gave me a note saying that I needed to go to medical respite. They never sent me there. I had to fight DSS with 10 fair hearings to get where I'm at right now. I just won a Social Security disability hearing that I fought for 12 years. I've been fighting all my life. I'm not going to stop. But I don't like to see the game of manipulation, one-on-one. I don't like to see that game. I like to see progress. Like, if people are panhandling, how about this? Send them to rehab. And then when they come out of rehab, offer them a job. So they don't need to panhandle on the corner. Employment helps people. I came home from prison after doing 8.5 years in prison. I put in 180 job applications, and a guy in Midland Farms in Manans called me up and hired me. I didn't only become a worker, I became corrugation supervisor. I was running the place after being there, coming home from prison. So you can't use prison as an excuse to be homeless. But you, to get housing now, because of my criminal record, I have to have a criminal background. So it's going to be hard to get. I can't go into any private housing, but I ain't blaming that on anybody. That's what I did. What I'm saying, Lark Street used to be banged, but Lark Street died out. There ain't no Black Lives Matter thing in the middle of the street anymore. People are not even cleaning up behind their dogs. You walk down the street, I got a rollator, and I got to fight to get around dog shit that's hanging out in the street. But I come down here to the mayor's office, the lady tells me they have a pooper school. I'm not a pooper scooper, so why do I have to scratch it off of my shoe? I don't know what the solution is. I see the people out there not homeless, but panhandling too. I had a guy curse me out on Lark Street. I had a guy willing to fight me and came after me with a knife, and you know what I said? Here's $1, brother. That's all you're going to get. I'm homeless too.
Canyon Ryan.
Hello, it's good to see you all. Happy New Year. First time in 2025. Canyon Ryan, 25 North Pine Ave, City of Albany. And I'm here to talk about the Ordinance 2272-24. Less than an hour ago, all federal grants and aid was supposed to be paused. Now that's been temporarily held for less than a week. What that means for a homelessness prevention organization like United Tenants of Albany is, I don't know. We had some tough conversations today about like, yeah, that's where all the rental assistance money comes from. And it still really remains unclear. It's only been temporarily paused. And, you know, what that means for the services that are supposed to impact and help people who are on the street begging for money also remains really unclear. Today, CARES of New York sent out an email notifying the Continuum of Care members that, as well as Emergency Solutions grant distributors, which we are one of, to prepare for disruptions of reimbursement and any activity associated with grant execution. And according to the National Housing Resource Center today, the pause includes housing counseling, HOPWA, fair housing, eviction prevention, and so on. And all that said, I don't think that there's like a worse time that we could be having this conversation. 2 years ago, during an Aligned Resolutions introduction, advocates proposed like a 4-page document of many solutions to address the immediate issue of homelessness and prevention. Alas, here we are. That resolution alluded to future punitive measures, and we're talking about the punitive measures, not fighting for the money to do housing first. I'm not saying that you're not, but I just think this conversation shouldn't really take precedence. So, in the bill it says that there's no fiscal impact associated with this. I think that might not necessarily be true because the courts are going to be inundated if this is, carried into effect. Will it not cost more to jail our constituents? Does it not require police investment in bothering the homeless? This is not a no-cost solution because it's not a solution and there's not no cost. Nothing in this ordinance memo refers to the people being directly impacted, like ignoring the cost to the city and county. What about the fiscal impact of individuals? We're talking recidivism, risks of relapse, issues with achieving sustainable employment if you have to go do your community service, or you have to pay a fine, or you have a jail term. Good luck holding a job down. Well, back to the street, right? To this bill, it talks about, deterring the performance of aggressive solicitation, the importance of immediate means of egress during emergencies, which are homeless people and people panhandling preventing firefighters from going into somewhere on fire? The memo is so strange. And the impact of begging on the business environment, but what about the people that this is going to impact? Like Joe said, we're not talking about them. Are we really helping them by putting them in contact with the criminal justice system? This is precisely the direction that the federal government is going now. Either you accept mandatory programs and go into an encampment, which is what Trump's proposing, or you go to jail. There already exists a jail to homelessness pipeline, and we're just inverting that. So now there's also a homelessness to jail pipeline. And I just want to say, neither of those resolve the issue. There's a book called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. The solution is quite simple. Develop affordable housing, invest in our residents, and control the rents. Thank you.
Matt Drescher.
Hello, Matt Drescher, 1 Carroll Terrace. So I'm here for our annual attempt at circumventing the First Amendment with respect to panhandling here. This is not a new problem, and it's not a problem going away. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but there's a storm coming, and you don't need to be a weatherman to know which way is the wind blowing. We live at the crossroads of both rail and road. The homeless epidemic is going to expand dramatically with these cuts to funding for housing, both the ones done by the Biden administration and whatever's coming out now with Donnie. We know there is a problem coming. We can be reactionary and try to treat the symptoms, or we can get ahead of things. You are not going to fix homelessness by putting people in cages. It doesn't work. You only make things worse for those people. And if they manage to get out, they're either going to end back up in jail or they're right back out in the streets. We need tangible things. We need housing, first and foremost. And we don't need the kind of housing that helps some slumlord line his pockets or helps some developer give some kickbacks to the right politicians. The solution to this is not going to be easy, and it's not going to be one that's going to profit the people that like to profit from these things. To quote Kennedy, we do these things not because they are easy, we do them because they are hard. The right solution, the right way here will take work. It will be a hard road, and it might not be a very personally profitable one. But that is the solution. People need houses. Whether they have disabilities, drug addiction, they need houses. Whether it's because medical debt has just landed them out on the street. I don't know if anyone's been to California lately. Fighters aside, I was out in California last year. The homeless encampments there are now regular working people. There are people working 40-hour, 50-hour-a-week jobs, living out of their cars, living out of tents on the streets. That is the future. That is what's coming. The squeeze on the working class is not going to stop until we are all fighting for crumbs. We need, as a society, as a government, as local politicians, to come together for a solution on housing, a real solution on housing. I yield the rest of my time to whomever.
Cheryl Glenn. Cheryl Glenn.
Good evening. My name is Cheryl Glenn. I live in Latham, New York. I'm a state worker in downtown Albany. I want to first make factually clear that I'm here on my own behalf, and the statements that I'm about to make are my own thoughts and beliefs. I would like to add my comments to this evening's safety meeting on why we need aggressive panhandling prohibition. I'm a state worker who works in downtown Albany. I've had 3 incidents of aggressive panhandling. One was on State Street while walking alone to my bank on my lunch. I was relentlessly screamed at for money. Another time, an individual banged on the driver's side window of my car while I was stopped at a red light at Madison and South Pearl. He continued banging on my window and begging for money until the light changed and I could proceed away. Thankfully, he didn't step in front of my car. The third individual was begging me for money as he stood directly in front of my car, which was parked in my private state employee parking lot. At the time, I was removing my backpack from my back in order to place it in my back seat before I could even attempt to get in my car. That means I was at my most vulnerable position right then. I've also had another 2 incidents downtown lately. One involved a person hallucinating on drugs who accosted me in front of my office building. Another person in a psychotic break menaced me and my 2 co-workers at the intersection of Hudson and South Pearl as we walked to our state parking lot. Last week, my state worker friend and co-worker was hit over the head and assaulted on her travel to her work site from her parked car. Enough is enough. Do you get anxious on your way to work? Do you get anxious when you should be happy when your workday is over? Myself and my coworkers, we are anxious at those times. Why? Because we fear the dreaded walk from our state employee parking lot to our office building. We should not have to fear for our personal safety going to work. Contrary to the acting police chief's statements, I am not afraid because there are less people on the streets. I am afraid because there is no police presence and the inability for its enforcement, which deters panhandling in and around or near our 4 lots, the Pastures lot, the Liberty lot, the Grand Street, and the Madison South Pearl lots and the surrounding streets. I agree, more supports are needed for the homeless and the mentally ill. I thank the police for the hard job they have However, workers and the people who live in this city should have the ability to go back and forth about their day without fear. Thank you for listening to me.
Bebin Francis. Bebin Francis.
My name is Bevin Francis. I live at 57 Garden Street in Albany. I'm an organizer with the National Union of the Homeless, and I'm here to speak on the anti-panhandling ordinance. I'm speaking to you as a person with experiential authority, as someone who has mental health complexities, has experienced homelessness, and currently organizes with Albany's unhoused community. Incarceration and involuntary commitment are not the solutions to Albany's housing crisis. The myth that the unhoused community simply denies services needs to be eliminated. I spend a lot of time on the streets of Albany talking with folks about why they choose not to stay in a shelter. The answer is often that there is no room or people want to maintain their autonomy. Another common answer is that the conditions of the shelter are just too much to bear. I went on a tour of the shelters of Albany and found that they can be demeaning. Adhering to the strict regulations can be overwhelming. Every shelter, except the City Mission, requires 90% of an individual's income to stay. I implore all of you to take a tour of the shelters to see what it's like to live there before you judge folks for choosing not to stay there. The rate of homelessness within Albany has increased over 70% between 2023 and 2024. So long as we ignore the problem, solicitations will only increase regardless of this ordinance. The solution is clear. People need housing, not handcuffs. We need possibilities, not probation. The only mandatory services that the unhoused should encounter are barrier-free and comprehensive social services. They need health care and an income that will meet the cost of living. There is no justice or compassion in this ordinance. The system is stacked up against people experiencing homelessness and poverty, and the solutions need to be systemic. The problems are the rent is too high and services are non-existent and inadequate. The problem is a lack of affordable housing and economic opportunity. I again implore you to spend some time talking with the people that this ordinance would impact. And I would also like to invite you to join us, the National Union of the Homeless, for the Focus Breakfast on Thursday mornings at the Westminster Church. This is the opportunity to expand your understanding of the community and to make informed decisions. And in direct response to some statements made here, I would like to say that instead of focusing on behaviors that you won't tolerate, you should be focused on conditions that you won't tolerate. I'd also like to state that I walk down Lark Street every single day, and I've never been harassed or chased. Yes, people ask me for money. I say yes or no. I keep moving. And finally, I'd like to point out the very clear fact from the people that I speak to every day. 50, 60 people a week who are unhoused that I talk to, my co-organizer Joe talks to, those people are in this room right now. They often experience violence at the hands of citizens of the city. They are harassed, they are kicked at, they are spit at, they are called names. The police mishandle them. So, violence is an issue that shouldn't be tolerated for anybody, housed or unhoused. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Sharma.
Mihir Sharma, 2 Sprague Place, Albany, New York. A little while ago, actually right around the time that this ordinance was being talked about, my partner and I were leaving a bar on Lark Street. They had just gotten a promotion, so we went out to celebrate with a couple of drinks, and we were walking back home. I live not too far from there. A homeless man came up to us and asked if we had any change. My partner had some, so we said yes. We gave him the change. He said, "Thank you so much. Have a good night." And we said, "You too." And then he walked away. Now, there was an APD officer up the block from me a little bit. We're walking past him, and he stops us, and he says, "You know, homeless people have been really violent on Lark Street lately." And we said, "We're fine. Have a good night." He keeps following us. He's literally following us at this point, and he's telling me, "You know that these people aren't even from Lark Street. They're coming here and they're asking people for money." And I said, "Okay, we're fine," once again. At this point, the APD officer is harassing me, not the person who I spoke to before, who was very, very kind and very polite. And if he wasn't, I would have continued my walk home like I do through Lark Street almost every day. I've witnessed APD harass homeless people on Lark Street. We've seen the increase in APD presence on Lark Street already before this has even passed. And I've had to intervene. My partner has had to intervene, talking to the police and mediating between them and a homeless person who has been doing absolutely nothing. Like, we've spoken to people who are not even panhandling. They're simply sitting outside a business, not saying anything. And those are the people that are being targeted right now. This legislation is not even on the books, and that's not stopping APD from enforcing something, right? Like, these people are being targeted right now. We need housing, not jail. We know this will only worsen things for people. Who's going to enforce if someone's sitting outside a business asking for money for 2 minutes or 5 minutes, if they leave for 500 feet and come back? How are we going to know that? Who's keeping track of this? What are we going to be spending money on? Police enforcement, police present, court proceedings, putting people in jail. We know that jail time costs more money than literally just housing someone. So I feel like this is a really misdirected use of resources. We know we need less barriers and more funding, especially right now when all of our services are being attacked on a federal level. This is when the city needs to step in, as they have before for housing, and say that that's not going to fly here. Like Karen was just talking about, the threats that we have to the funding that prevent hundreds and hundreds of people across the capital region from becoming homeless. That is the threat that we are facing now, not my homeless neighbors that I see every day and say hello to. We get calls from people on our hotline who have been literally ghosted by their caseworker for months, and we have to hound them to get an answer back from them. You've heard from directly impacted people, you've heard from caseworkers, you've heard from service providers and community members about how misplaced this is. The National Union of the Homeless held a rally on the longest night, the winter solstice, and it was freezing. We were freezing to our bones. I have never felt wind that cold, and I hate the cold. But I got to go home to my apartment that night, and a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people are out there on Lark Street right now, freezing in the cold, as we are sitting here debating on if they get to have the same civil rights and protections and free speech as the people in this room right now. So please, please, please consider the brutality that this will allow to happen. Thank you.
Dennis Mosley. Dennis Mosley. Oh, he left, okay. James Calgalone.
Good evening. My name is James Jackalone. I'm a resident in Albany's 2nd Ward, 33 Trinity Place. Threatening someone, particularly due to their being a member of a protected class, is already a criminal act. So to suggest that this ordinance is merely about aggressive threats is to suggest that it is redundant. To suggest that this ordinance is to increase the use of support services belies the reality of fines and incarceration as things that demonstrably increase the likelihood that an unhoused person will remain in that state. And I don't know what logic it took for you to suggest that aggressive solicitation, your aggressive solicitation bill, has nothing to do with panhandling and nothing to do with solicitation before using those two words more than a dozen times in your description of it. But it suggests to me that your claims about its intent are not made in good faith. It is absolutely unconscionable to criminalize the act of asking for help in a public place by the members of our community who are in the greatest need of assistance and who are in a very literal sense, the most vulnerable among us. To make it a punishable offense to perform the last act that we have as humans to protect ourselves, to seek assistance from others, is to bury our empathy, the feature which makes us most capable of doing good as a species in order to prioritize our own comfort. Making it easier to punish panhandling will not reduce the number of people in Albany who are unhoused or in need of assistance, and neither will jailing those who are out of desperation perform the act anyway. It will only put them a little more out of sight and a little more out of mind for those fortunate enough to have never experienced housing insecurity themselves or to have a friend or loved one who has. When I'm solicited on the street, it's a reminder that my government has failed to care for its community. And I am solicited on the street because I walk a mile to work every day and I walk a mile back at the end. And I don't have a car, so I also walk a few miles northwest when I want to visit friends, or northeast, and I walk a mile southwest when I want to visit my local library. This ordinance will not help the people of Albany and would be equivalent to coating a rotting stud with spackle. It might look smoother on the outside, but the decay will only continue to grow. Albany needs action to help the unhoused, and this ordinance is not that action. You've already heard from the people working in social services what actual actions help. Funding housing, funding support systems. That's what this council should be doing. Thank you for your time.
Andrew Seaman.
Hi, I'm Andrew Seaman, 485 Washington Avenue. If we want to help the unhoused people in our community, we need to give them rehabilitation. That means to collectively supply them with resources they need, housing and mental health care. Let me be clear, fines are not rehabilitation. Jail is not rehabilitation. Probation officers are not prepared to rehabilitate unhoused people. They have 50 to 100 cases on their desk at one point. They cannot provide what these people need. And it's not like an ordinance like this is saving taxpayers any money. According to the Rethink Homelessness report, it costs over 31 grand to criminalize a single unhoused person versus 10 grand to provide supporting housing. This is from 2014. It's most likely much more expensive for both now. But criminalizing them is clearly 3 times or more expensive. So let's cut through the crap. What is the real goal of an ordinance like this? Well, just like every attempt to criminalize poverty, it is not to keep the streets safe. It is to keep the privileged people who are not worried about their housing situation more comfortable. The real point of an ordinance like this is so that the people stuck in the cycle of homelessness will stay there, and to create an opening into the cycle of the prison industrial complex, where there's more free labor provided while these private prisons can only just create more profit. That is the real goal of any attempt to criminalize poverty like this one. Begging is not dangerous. It just means someone is in desperate help and need. Now, desperation can become dangerous in certain contexts, but the solution for that desperation is not finding, is not locking them up. It is to give them what they need, what they are so desperate for. We are at a tipping point in our nation. According to the last president, we face an oligarchy. We are descending into fascism. And as we watch this in real time, our community is here to stand up against authoritarian ordinances like this and say no. We will not allow the state to criminalize poverty. As a community, we will not let the people most in need of help take the brunt of this fall. And we ask that our representatives stand up with us against this authoritarian attempt. We need to give these people housing and mental health care, not put them behind bars. If this ordinance is passed, it will only exacerbate the issue. It will not improve it. The question is who faces the consequences after that exacerbation. Thank you.
That's our last speaker for the evening.
Thank you, everybody. You know, this is going to be a difficult issue. You know, if it was easy, it would have been solved. We're going to work on this. This is proposed legislation. I don't know if we have the votes to move this out of committee. I think we really need to discuss this further. My feeling is I'd like to bring in probation. I'd like to bring in the chief of police, and actually I'd like to bring in the sheriff to talk about some of the stuff that was discussed tonight. I do want to tell you, though, it scares me when I hear about workers being accosted. And it's a fine line between begging and asking for money and being physically accosted. And you know, our society has no room for that, and we gotta do something about that. We also got to do something, having people sleep on the street. I was talking to Reverend Joe earlier tonight. Some of these shelters, you can't bring your belongings with you. So what do you do? And it's, you know, and I hear that, and you know, this is difficult. And we know what the national trend is, and I can guarantee you nobody on this council, I know everybody who serves on this council, nobody wants that type of, you know, fascism and, you know, not helping people. I think what the city's about is to provide for its residents. And, you know, as long as I'm here, I'm going to make sure of that. So unless, and does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up at this point? Go ahead, Sonia.
I just want to thank everyone for the very helpful discussion tonight and hearing you all. The two things that I'd ask the sponsors, it sounds like we're going to continue this conversation, that came up. Most resonating with me was the impact of potential misdemeanors or that being on housing applications, because then that's kind of counterintuitive to what we're trying to do here, which is help solve an issue that we face as a city. So I would like the sponsors and the staff to look into that and see what we can do. And then also something came up, I think one of the first speakers mentioned a tier approach, and potentially focusing on volunteerism, rehab first, and then from there, after multiple offenses, seeing what is done. That's something else that I think we could, as a body, explore further as well. Thank you.
Megan?
I would just note in response to that, when we did the penalties for offenses, we did them in the order in which we were hoping the courts would impose. So it starts with community service, probation, fine, and followed by, lastly, imprisonment, which again, we kept at the level of incarceration that can be imposed under a violation. So the term of confinement, if the courts were to issue a term of confinement, is consistent with what is already in the statute.
Thank you. I don't think, from my read of that, that's clear in terms of the order that it would follow. So I think that's the intent, but maybe we can be stronger on language as we look to revise and strengthen and come up with a solution that's best for all.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Kelly.
I'm not sure what the solution is. Obviously, we're working towards it. This is a council that brought you, just cause evictions, inclusionary zoning, housing vacancy. We're fighting for folks here. So we're not just trying to attack poverty, people that live in poverty. I grew up in poverty myself. The thing is, the woman that came and made the statement about being accosted, she's genuinely afraid and scared. And she doesn't stand alone. But we also have to take into account, when I'm downtown sometimes, Pearl Street Diner is one of the businesses, for instance. There are a few businesses that are having issues because of this. We can't just take one side or the other. I don't know what the answer is. We got some work to do, but it's not just about attacking homelessness and poverty and poor people. That's not it. We want to find a solution, and we want to work towards it. And maybe it involves us coming to breakfast and talking through some of this stuff with folks. But it's not so simple. And we all care. This is a caring. I've been on the council for 3 terms, and this is probably as good as it's been, I think, in terms of caring about people. And we're going to keep doing that. But this is a tough nut to crack, and we'll keep working at it. But it's not. We need to support our homeless folk, our unhoused folk, but we also need to support our businesses. And people that work in the city that take exception with being accosted. So that's all I got.
Okay, if there's no further comment, does anybody want to?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everybody. This was very useful tonight. Thank you.